divides in Meridian in 1964. I lived on 49th Avenue near Highland Park, where the first African American had not yet stepped into the city pool. That would happen 5 years later, on the very day that the first man walked on the moon. During the summer of '64, I spent a lot of time at that pool. 49th Avenue breaks at 14th Street and picks up again at 9th Street. When my friends and I rode our bikes down 49th Avenue south from our house, it dumped us into a field with blackberries and patches and kudzu. Today that area includes the MSU Meridian campus. In the other part of 49th Avenue, the part I rarely saw, is called James Chaney Drive. The divide in that road was one of many in Meridian. Some of those divides I knew about. I was Catholic, and most everyone I knew was Baptist. My parents were from the north, and all my friends had families with deep Mississippi roots. My junior high, Cape Griffin, was on the other side of town, not the side where some of my wealthier Catholic friends lived. I sometimes felt like an outsider because of my religion and my Yankee parents. I had no idea that the privileges I took for granted were not shared by everyone in Meridian. The few black folks I knew worked for my family as maid or farmhand. There were also divides that I did not know about. Clear across town from my house was the south side, with trailer parks and people much less well off than my very middle-class family. Where good people grew up, like a friend who went on to become a doctor, but also where others grew up, like those who would become involved in the murders of James Chaney, Mickey Schwerner, and Andrew Goodman. And somewhere in between those divides, there were people we now call Freedom Summer veterans. There were kids, including Eric and Sadie and Richard, attending the Meridian Freedom School. But I knew nothing about that then, and my life was relatively idyllic. I'd like to move now into a little bit of the school situation around those times and talk about the era of school choice and changes to Meridian schools. So I'll pose the first question to Eric. Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka was a landmark United States Supreme Court case which declared state laws establishing separate but public schools for black and white students to be unconstitutional. Eric, could you tell us a little bit about what was going on in Mississippi with school freedom of choice and other policies and actions in response to the 54 Brown versus Board decision?
I can't find anybody that I speak with talk about the 1954 Brown versus the Board of Education decision that was made by the Supreme Court that would agree with my point of view about that decision. I don't think I'd get anybody in here to agree with me either. But I've kind of satirically said it's probably the worst decision that could have happened, especially for African Americans. I was glad to be going to school with blacks only, because in that environment that I remember prior to that decision, which I wasn't born when that decision was made, but certainly I was going to school in the 60s. I remember being in the black schools, the elementary schools, Weston Elementary, that's where I was. And I remember such a caring environment, that the teachers cared, the community cared. You know, and I thought about Hillary making millions of dollars off of that book that she said it takes a village to raise a child. We already knew that. That's what we as black people were doing. In this community here where you sit today, that was already happening. And I had this point of view that, you know, how could you integrate when economically, educationally, blacks were at a much lower level than our white counterparts. So where's the real integration? Integration, you need to be at an equal level where integration could really happen. And so I had this point of view, I didn't need to go to school with white people. I enjoyed going to school in a black community. I really did. But I understood this idea of the need for integration. And it's needed if we want to move forward as a human race. But what happened is that they had what they call the choice. And so at the end of the school year, you would take your form home to your parents, and they could fill the form out and choose what school they wanted you to go. And I passed Chalk Elementary School every day to go to Weston Elementary School. And so before I think they started thinking about sending blacks to the white schools, we always chose the black schools to go to. And later on, as Richard mentioned, an older sister and my brother Richard and an older sister, my parents chose to send them to the white school. My sister Linda went to Chalk, Richard and Shirley went to Cape Griffin, and I still went to Weston Elementary, which was a black school. And but I thought about, my mother recently passed this past May, and someone gave a tribute to my mother that made me think about, wow, that at the time, as Richard mentioned, that my mother was part of a soup that when she couldn't choose her to register a child at Cape Griffin, she was part of that soup. But what I thought about was the courage that my mother had, and probably at the same time, the fear that she had to have, knowing that she was choosing to send her children to be subject to the kind of racism and the kind of venomous hatred that many people had against us as black people. But she had a lot of courage. I mean, that was just absolutely powerful, knowing that my mother, the kind of courage that she had, but at the same time, probably the fear of sending her children into that environment. And I was later put into the environment my 5th grade year. And I'm going to kind of wrap up here. I'm going to tell the story that a friend of mine, and he's a good friend, he's a classmate today. As a matter of fact, he has an Airbnb place that I'm staying in. Jimmy Hawford was an incredible friend, a white friend that when I met him in the 5th grade, he wasn't that good of a friend, because I'll never forget some of the gestures that he and others made against me as an African American. They thought I was dumb, they thought I was ignorant, they didn't want to stand next to me, they didn't want to be close to me because they thought I would rub off on them, I was dirt. But I knew that was a learned thing from them. And as time evolved, Jimmy became a very good friend. And he's a good friend today. He's an incredible guy that's still here in Mississippi in Jackson. He practices law, environmental law. But I do believe that as time moves and as we evolve as a people, that we would become more integrated. As that 1954 Supreme Court decision, Brown versus the Board of Education, probably intended to bring integration about.
Sadie, as one of the Meridian 5, one of 5 high school age students at the forefront of the choice option, what was that time and experience like?
Well, in response to what Eric just said, I suppose one of the reasons that I don't disagree with what he said about our black schools, because I went to the black schools until the 12th grade, and I think I received a great education. However, I was disappointed with the words that say schools are separate but equal. That bothered me. Now, I'm not a philosopher or one of those people who want to be smart about anything, but to me that was a stupid comment. Separate but equal. If it was so equal, why were we separate? Was my question. So when I went to Meridian High, I had the answer. Meridian High School's lawn was well manicured. The rooms and the hallways were wonderfully painted. Now, they knew we were coming, so I'm certain to know that they didn't paint it for us. So that was there every day. We went to the cafeteria and we had meals that were absolutely wonderful. We had a choice. I didn't even know that word in Harris. I had quit eating in the cafeteria for that matter. We had a choice of what we wanted to eat. And I'm saying, really, people? And then, of course, when I would get the books, years of our school books, we would have names in those books of students we didn't know who they were. Hand-me-downs. Why couldn't we get new books? So there was a divide. And I want you to know that when we went to the high school and enrolled, it wasn't like it was with Ruby Bridges and some of the others. No, there were no protests out front. There were not parents at the doors. But the students let us know that we were definitely not welcomed. That was name calling, and there was all kinds of antics going on. One day it was egg throwing, one day it was water throwing. Whatever it was, we tolerated it. We put up with it. Because out of all of what was done to us, I remembered that I had a cause for being there, and it was far greater than all the harassment we could have had. So one thing that these ladies just did, that song, Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around, that was a freedom song that we sang at the Freedom School. I took that song every day to school with me because I knew that one day, hopefully, that my sisters, I have 4 of them, could be doctors and nurses and lawyers and have their own businesses and bankers. We could be decision makers. We didn't have to stand and let somebody tell us that even though we explained the Constitution as best as we could, that we did not do a good job and we couldn't register to vote. I wanted us to have that difference. It has come, but it's come at a cost. We all know what that cost is. I remember that Dr. King spoke of nonviolence. We went to that school, we were nonviolent. We took everything that was dished at us. And I can't say we did it with a smile, because that would be a lie. But we took it. In May of 1966, we were the first black girls to march across Grace Stadium and graduate. Our parents to see the very first blacks. We made a difference. Meridian began to change. We now can see those changes. We're sitting here black and white together, as Dr. King had already stated one day we would be. Black and white together. And we can discuss the race, the issue of race. Isn't that wonderful?
So Mississippi's resistance to Brown versus the board went on for well over a decade. Finally, an order came down from the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals to desegregate. Students left their black or predominantly white schools for the Christmas break in 1969. Over the holidays, Meridian Public Schools finalized the plan for forced integration. In January 1970, students returned to different campuses and classmates. Eric, you were in 7th grade at Carver, and I was a senior at Meridian High when federally mandated desegregation occurred in the Meridian Public Schools. Just tell us a little bit, please, about how that change affected you, maybe adding on to that. I think you already started to go
Yes,
there.
I did.
Yeah.
Gave a little bit too much information. Anyway, yes, I remember I was at 6th grade at Chalk, I guess the year 68, 69, that school year. And the school year 69, 70, my parents did make the choice to send me to Carver. Now, at the time, I didn't realize why they did that. I thought I would be going to Cape Griffin. But I assumed that my parents more than likely had an inkling that forced integration was going to come that following semester. So they probably went ahead and sent me to Carver. But the one thing I remember about Carver, and then I think they were planning for the integration that was going to happen that second semester of 1970. I wish I could remember the superintendent's name. I'm pretty sure many of you know him. Absolutely. Dr. Todd. I remember Principal Seitz gathered us in the gym to have Dr. Todd come and speak to us. And man, the thing I remember the most listening to Dr. Todd was he calling us Negroes. You remember that, Larry?
Yes, I do. Yes, I remember that.
I said, this man can't even say Negro.
That's right.
And he in here in front of all of these black kids and still calling us Negroes. But, and I just, really that affected me. You would think that a school superintendent could pronounce the word Negro. So I guess he was just as ignorant. That's not fair, but anyway. So that was pretty impactful. But that's when we started going to school. The forced integration happened, and we moved on from there.
Okay, so desegregation had very little effect on me. I remember only one black female student in my classes, and she was actually already there under freedom of choice. I realized later when I looked back at my senior yearbook and wondered where the black students had been, what had happened. The desegregation had occurred by moving, I believe, the 9th or the 9th and 10th? The 9th graders at least. The white students went from the Meridian campus to the Harris campus. 10th grade went to the Harris campus, classes intact with their teachers. And the 11th and 12th grade black students from Harris came to the Meridian campus, classes intact with their teachers. Charles Armstrong Sr. was principal of Meridian High at the time. And when I recently spoke with his son Andy, I mentioned that it seemed all transparent to me. Andy said his father would have been pleased to hear that. There was much going on behind the scenes from 1965 to 1970 that Principal Armstrong had to consider. From how to deal with the water fountains, which he did by providing Dixie cups, to how to keep the black students safe. From an historic perspective, what happened in January 1970 was at once a huge step and a tiny step. Tiny because it might be argued that this wasn't integration at all, but rather coexisting in a shared space. Huge because it finally happened and unlike at other schools was nearly conflict-free. From a personal perspective, it had far less impact on me than it should have. Eric's house and mine were 5 minutes away by car, across one of those divides. We were destined not to know each other then. Decades later, we connected over our mutual interest in the stories of the movement, and we became friends. And it's remarkable how much we have in common, from our educations and our career choices to our ideologies and putting up with each other's sense of humor, etc. Those months in early 1970, the end of my senior year of high school, could have been an opportunity for me to open up my world and let some great people in, and it would take me far too long to realize that. So I'd like to move now, just to wrap up this section of the panel discussion, to what happened after high school, and I'll ask each Eric, Sadie, and me to say very briefly what we studied and where, what career employment options looked like in Mississippi at the time we graduated, and what choice we made and why. So beginning with Sadie.
Well, after Meridian High School, I attended Meridian Junior College, graduated 2 years there. I was tired. I'd had my fill of fighting for freedom. Hey, darling, a classmate. Fighting. So I told my mom I needed a rest. So I went to Chicago to visit relatives. While in Chicago, I actually got my first job. So a Mississippi education is a good thing, so you want to know. I was offered 2 positions. One just to give me some work experience, which I didn't have, and the other one was as a typist, and I had taken secretarial science at the college. So I accepted the one for typist, and as it would have it, that was publishing the New England Journal of Medicine. So those years in the 60s, I actually made a difference with the fingers. I left there, coming home, I wanted to go to four-year college, didn't have the money, so I worked at the radio station. When I went to USM, I had to go with a different mindset. Now, my folks had to pay for me to go to school, so I had to actually get what I went to school to get. I had to put it here. So while there, I did not do the thing called career, because that didn't exist for black children at the time, especially black girls. I didn't want to teach, so I had to find something else. So I took business administration. It included accounting and economics, marketing. Then I went to communications, and I took radio and TV. I tried to find something where I could actually be employable, and that was the key at the time. And to be honest with you, to this day, I've actually had a job in every area of my studies. I worked radio station Meridian, WQIC. I worked at WFOR in Hattiesburg, part-time when I was in school. I worked V103 in Atlanta, Georgia. I worked as a management and as I was telling the lady, Kentucky Fried Chicken, where I absolutely nothing except how to eat chicken. And I worked in management as Taco Bell. Even in that day and time, you had to do all the accounting work and count up the money at the end of the day. It was my education that got me where I was. When I left school, I went to work for the Southern Regional Council, a civil rights fighting organization for 13 southern states. How did I know that I would go there? Isn't that interesting? Then I went on to come back to Meridian and get married to a Mississippi man. I have worked in Meridian at legal services because I thought at the very beginning of my life I would actually like law. But because I had to do so much as a young person to help around the house, I didn't feel I was well-read enough to go into law. So I got rid of that thought. So I worked with legal services. I retired from East Mississippi State Hospital, where I thought I would never work. But you know, in life becomes humbling as you get older. And I'm afraid that I have become humbled in so many ways over the years. That's why when I look at faces, and I remember you saying something about working together and being people together, I don't see color. I can't see color, I just see people's hearts, and I see those people as who they are. And baby girl that came through the door, I remember you in school. Everything wasn't hunky-dory with us in those days, but we can relate today. I don't remember your name, but I do remember your face. Meridian High was a good time for me. And I will tell anybody today and from now on, sometimes when you're exposed to things in life, your attitude changes, and mine strictly has.
So I went on to Mississippi State to study computer science and get a bachelor's and a master's degree. And employment options in Meridian looked pretty slim at the time. There was the power company and the data processing firm where I'd interned. And I recall most of my job interviews were outside the state of Mississippi. At MSU, we used computers that were made by Sperry Corporation, which is now Unisys. And the year I graduated, senior managers were sent out to all their alma maters to interview on the premise that the great talent like them might be replicated by going back to their schools. So one of those senior managers was an MSU alumnus, and that combined with a certain useful ignorance that had me failing to appreciate how cold it could possibly be 1,000 miles to the north is what landed me in Minnesota.
after high school, I didn't actually graduate from Meridian. My father was called to another church in Columbia, Mississippi, and my senior year was spent in Columbia, not Meridian. But I went on to college. I've always loved math and science, and as like Susan, and that's some of the things we found in common with each other, I was also a computer science major. And when I went off to college, I still came out of an activist family, so I still kind of had a little activism in me. And I went to the University of Southern Mississippi, and at the time, there were about 12,000 students, I believe, and about 800 blacks that were attending USM. So there was a small group of African Americans, and there was a fraternity on campus, the only black fraternity on campus, that was kind of acting as the core glue for the African American community there on campus. So that kind of lured me into pledging a fraternity, Omega Psi Phi. Many people who may know of fraternities, that's usually you join to go party and have a good time. And that was part of it too, but mine was more out of this activism, that it was an organization that was truly committed to being a group that could bring blacks together and be a place where blacks could come together and express their experiences, what they were having there at a predominantly white university. So that was a compelling reason for me actually pledging. But got my degree in computer science and still wanting to stay in Mississippi. I couldn't believe it. I saw Mississippi as the poorest state in the Union, a state that was the most ass-backward state in this country, the state that needed to move forward. And I wanted to be a part of Mississippi to move it forward. And I tried, as probably Susan probably could have gotten a job if she wanted to, at the power company. And I actually interviewed at the power company and other data processing places like the Bell Company, but nobody offered me a job. So I started interviewing with companies outside of the state of Mississippi. I went out to Los Angeles and interviewed with this company, Honeywell. They were a mainframe software development company, and so they made me an offer. But I still kind of had this thing of wanting to stay in Mississippi. I wanted to be a part of the growth of Mississippi. I wanted to be a part of seeing Mississippi move forward. But I'll never forget, my brother-in-law, who was living out in Los Angeles, he actually had to leave Mississippi. Susan, he couldn't go to Mississippi State. He wanted to be an electrical engineer. This was in 1965 when he graduated from high school. That's where he wanted to go to school, but they wouldn't allow him to go. So there were some people that apparently paid this money to go to Tennessee State to get his electrical engineering degree. So he had to leave the state of Mississippi even to go to college to get an engineering degree. But I remember him telling me, he said, "Eric, get your ass out of Mississippi, because they are not going to be fair to you. You will not be given the kind of opportunity to show the kind of skills and talents that you have. Come to LA where you can at least be where the technology is moving forward and where people at least give you a job. They still may not like you, because believe me, there was prejudice in Los Angeles. I've lived there. There was prejudice in San Francisco. I've lived there. There was prejudice in New York. I've lived there. And there's prejudice in Detroit where I live now. So don't think it was only here in the South. It wasn't. And it's still not. Michigan carried your president, the ones that you voted for. Anyway, I'll leave that alone. But yeah, I went on to build a career as a computer science, as a software developer. I have a passion for technology, and I still have a passion for wanting to be a change agent and making people's lives a better life. Not only black, but whites as well, because there need to be changes happening in the lives of white people as well as we continue to move forward. Thank you.
So that concludes the look back at then, and before we start looking at now, we'd like to welcome back the Sweet Spirits Choir for two more freedom songs. for the